Ocean acidification is something that I've been able to observe myself. I'm a scuba diver. I go scuba diving locally here in the Keys. I've gone off in Miami Beach. I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of traveling in Cozumel, some parts of the Caribbean, and I've actually traveled to Australia and dove the Great Barrier Reef. And yes, and it seems to be a global problem where we have coral bleaching, and basically it has to do it's a concoction of both water temperature and the acidification of the oceans, right? As the oceans become warmer due to climate change, global warming, well, that releases more CO2 that's been locked up inside the ocean. And this release of CO2 is being incorporated back into the water, making it more acidic. Think about like your soda, right? When your soda is very cold, the gases are condensed. So when you open it up, it doesn't release a lot of gas. But when you open up a warm soda, the gas just comes bubbling out. And this is the same thing that's going to happen. The large amounts of CO2 are concentrated in cold parts of the ocean. It's condensed. It's at the bottom. It's heavy. But as the oceans warm up, these gases start bubbling up, just like that soda. Nitrogen enrichment from fossil fuels. Nitrogen released by burning fossil fuels travel through the air. All right, nitrogen falls in different resources. We've seen this in Florida, particularly when you look at not specifically nitrogen enrichment, but the runoff, right, of fertilizers bringing in red tide. That's something that we suffered last year, and it has really hurt the economy for Florida because we rely on tourism in order to pay lots of the goods and services in the way of taxes and revenue for the state. And if we don't have tourists coming in here because our state's not pretty, because you go to the beach and it's full of dead fish, obviously that's going to be detrimental to our economy and to us because then we'll have to pay higher taxes. So this definitely hurts us as far as the environment is concerned and economically. Changes in land use talks about deforestation. Deforestation can affect water quality, streams, rivers, and mountain areas. Deforestation increases soil erosion, which can cause landslides. We've seen that, for instance, in California and different areas, especially after large fires where we have deforestation taking place, landslides occurring. We saw this in the past, in the 1930s. One of the big results, well, one of the issues at the 1930s during the Great Depression was the Great Dust Bowl, right? The breadbasket of America due to poor farming practices and the overuse of land and farmers not having resources because of the Great Depression to invest in fertilization, in watering of crops. Well, they just overused the land and it became a huge desert. You know, the soil was consumed and eroded away. And what was left was just sand, which is similar to a desert. Reforestation, scientifically guided reforestation or replanting of forests. Thankfully, that's something that we have learned. Now, timber companies will go in, no longer, certainly in the US, do they use clear cutting practices. Well, they would go in and devastate whole forests and they cut everything down. Now, equipment and technology has allowed for some of these timber companies to come in and just cut old growth timber, right, which is more economically advantageous, and leave the younger saplings to grow. And then they will go in and they'll go ahead and plant again because it's actually the harvesting of wood and lumber is a renewable resources because we can grow trees again. So properly managed, that has been advantageous. Monoculture, when large areas are used for grazing or to grow monoculture for long periods, fertilizers and pesticides can change soil structure and microbiomes in ways that degrade soil and prevent secondary succession. Right, so basically, by over-tilling of the land, overuse of the land creates that. Certain farming habits, right, can reduce this, right, where we have the rotation of crops. Now we know that in order to maintain the soil, the integrity of the soil biome, it would be advantageous to, at one time, they would just clear fields out completely of all vegetation and just leave the soil behind. And now we know it's better to leave all that old growth in there and let the field actually leave it alone for a growing season or two. Let that bacteria enrich that soil, right, naturally. We've talked about nitrogen fixation, how plants actually are able to take in nitrogen, but as a derivative of ammonia, not as nitrogen itself. And this is through bacteria, right? So if we leave the bacteria alone in there, let it do its process, we can refertilize these fields without adding fertilizers that are mass produced someplace else. And then talks about development, urbanization, habitat loss, and fragmentation. We've experienced that here. One of the leading issues with the Florida panther is just that, habitat loss and fragmentation. At one time, we had the Everglades, a huge area of just a river of grass, right? Of starting from way above Lake Okeechobee all the way down to Florida Bay. No longer, due to human activity, the building of homes, urbanization, putting in roads, right? We have Tamiami Trail all the way south. We have I-75, Alligator Alley that cuts through. We have US 27 going up the middle of the state. Well, that's fragmented the actual habitat for the Florida panther. They roamed a huge area, and now they have not been able to get together in order to reproduce, and that has been detrimental. Same thing we've talked about in class about the key deer. At one time, they were part of the population of the mainland of the Everglades, but due to habitat fragmentation, the fact that we have the one main road going into the Keys, no longer can they make it out of the Keys and actually reproduce with the species that is here on the mainland. And they've become a separate and distinct species because of this. And it's also diminished their gene pool, and they're experiencing some problems themselves. Again, and all at the hands of our interaction. Invasive species is a big issue here in Florida. Of course, we know about the python, how it has no natural enemies. We also have the lionfish, right? Has overtaken, decimated our reefs. And again, these are species that come in. They don't have any natural predators, so they don't get picked off, right? So what happens is, just like we've talked about populations in the past, their population grows in a J-curve exponentially, right? They go on forever because there's just no limit to the resources. And what they do is they decimate other populations because of them being around. And it's something that we have to keep a handle on. This also talks about pollutants. Common forms of air pollution include smog, greenhouse gases, heavy metals, and aerosols. Primary source of water pollution are industrial and agricultural chemicals, residential sewage, and non-point sources. Talk about the ozone hole, which actually has been something that we've actually done a good job of. We actually were able to identify the problem with the ozone, and certain measures have taken, right, to reduce it, right? All the gases, CFCs and aerosol cans are one of the main culprits, and AC and regulation has helped keep that at bay. I'm going to end it right here. There'll be a part 3.